Back in the 60s, Frank Sinatra was one of the biggest artists in the world, so you can bet that he had a ton of money. Unsurprisingly though, there were a few men who wanted in on his fortune. So in 1963, Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin planned to kidnap Frank Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr., and hold him for ransom. They were asking for a ransom of $240,000, or $2,480,861 today, and they nearly got away with it. So let's rewind to the early 1960s where this story began. Dude, I'm getting hungry making this video, but I'm too lazy to cook some food.
Have you tried HelloFresh?
Hello what?
HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit.
Let me check this out. Okay, so you can make your own personal meal plans customized to your liking, whether you prefer meats or are a vegetarian. Oh, and you can choose the number of meals that they send to your house per week. Seems very convenient, especially if you're too busy to cook or, like myself, too lazy. Oh, and the menu has a ton of great options that are both healthy and delicious.
They use fresh ingredients and have a lot of healthy options like calorie-smart recipes and protein-smart recipes.
Man, HelloFresh really sounds like the perfect way to keep your New Year's resolutions by eating better, saving money, and saving time by not having to cook an entire meal every day. I do also have a lot of friends who seem to save time and money by ordering HelloFresh every week, so maybe I should give it a try. Make sure to click the link in the description or use my code POGMattyFree and get free breakfast for life. You heard me right. One breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. If that isn't a sweet deal, I don't know what is. Now let's get back to the video. Also, I hope you guys liked my acting. I think that was an Oscar-worthy performance. The grand plan to kidnap Frank Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr., stemmed from the mastermind Barry Keenan. Barry Keenan was a student at University High in West LA, and was actually in the same class as Frank Sinatra's daughter Nancy, the same daughter who missed his death because she was busy watching the Seinfeld finale. He eventually became a successful businessman, but after a car accident, he became addicted to alcohol and pills, and went completely broke. His parents were consumed with misfortune as well, as his dad had gone broke in the stock market and his mom was recovering from a suicide attempt. Barry thought that he was the one who had to save his family. On top of that, he had grown up around many wealthy people, and he wanted to be one of them. So he decided to kidnap someone and hold them for ransom to make his fortune. Like I said, he went to University High, a school which was filled with children of the rich and famous. He had many classmates to mull over as potential victims. Barry was studying kidnappings at the library, learning what went wrong and what not to do. After considering a few of his classmates, he eventually landed on Frank Sinatra Jr. Barry said, "I decided upon Jr. because Frank Sr. was tough, and I had friends whose parents were in show business, and I knew Frank always got his way. It wouldn't be morally wrong to put him through a few hours of grief worrying about his son." Barry actually knew Frank Sr., and apparently when he was in school with Nancy, when he would give his daughter rides, Barry would tag along. Barry even said, "He was always very nice to me." Then in October of 1963, Barry called his closest friend Dean Torrence. He asked Dean to meet him to request a little money to finance his plan. He told Dean his plan and was requesting about $5,000, which is worth about $51,000 today. Dean said Barry's plan was too bizarre, so he gave him $500 and told him to get his life together. However, in hindsight, Dean has spoken out about it, saying he never thought Barry would actually go through with it and figured it was just more of a fantasy that he would never actually pursue. So, since Dean didn't want to go through with it, Barry decided to hit up his old friend from high school, Joe Amsler. Joe also thought Barry's plan was crazy, but after offering him $100 a week, he accepted. Then Barry recruited John Irwin, a guy who was dating his mom, who also wanted the $100 a week. They actually attempted the kidnapping twice before finally going through with it. Apparently, they attempted it at a state fair in Phoenix, but decided to abort that mission. Then in LA, they decided to kidnap him in his apartment. There was a UCLA football game going on, and Barry planned to attend it so he had a good alibi. The three got a motel and began their plan. But things went south when they called the motel's operator and found out that JFK was assassinated. Joe and John seemingly were done. They didn't want to go through with the plan anymore. Barry, on the other hand, really wanted to. So like the smooth criminal he was, he convinced Joe to go to Lake Tahoe with him and get a job. This worked since Joe had been married and was out of work, so he desperately needed a job. But little did Joe know that while he was applying for jobs, Barry was following around Frank Jr. Barry needed money soon, so he convinced Joe to get back in on the plan. And they decided they were going to kidnap Frank Sinatra Jr. at his motel on Sunday, December 8th, 1963.
They play for high stakes at Lake Tahoe, but seldom so high as for $250,000 against the life of a youth like Frank Sinatra Jr. The desperate game with the 19-year-old son of the popular singer as stake begins while he is playing an engagement at one of the fancier nightclubs of the gambling resort. He is singing with the same band that his father got his start with a generation ago. New in show business, he holds the attention of audiences and of some not-so-well-wishers.
After playing a show at Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe, Frank Jr. went back to his motel. Around 9 p.m., Barry and Joe walked up to the door, pretending to be delivering a package. Frank let them in to deliver, then they pulled out their guns, tied up Frank Jr.'s friends, and then took off with him. They fled towards LA. Meanwhile, Frank Jr.'s friends freed himself and called the police. By 9:40 p.m., the FBI was already brought in on the case, and roadblocks were set up along the border of California and Nevada. Barry actually got Frank Jr. to cooperate, and based on Barry's account, it sounds like Frank Jr. was very cool with his kidnappers. Barry even said that he was very quickly starting to be one of the co-conspirators. They got stopped at a roadblock, and Barry was able to sweet-talk his way out of it, all while Frank Jr. played along. According to Barry, at this point, we'd all reassured each other that we weren't going to hurt each other. We weren't going to hurt Sinatra, and he was going to play along if we hit any more roadblocks. We're one big happy family on this drive through the night together. They arrived at a house in LA and were holding Frank Jr. there. Barry called John Irwin, who was very surprised they went through with it but didn't want to participate. However, after some more sweet talking, Barry convinced John to come help them out. The reason Barry needed John is because he was 42 years old, much older than Barry and Joe. He was also a Navy veteran of World War II and apparently was a really tough guy, so they wanted him to talk tough on the phone. By this point, Frank Jr. had been informed that this wasn't a robbery, but indeed was a kidnapping, which really upset him. He wouldn't give the kidnappers his dad's phone number, but it didn't matter as they eventually heard on the radio that Sinatra Sr. was set up at a hotel in Reno. So John called and told him that they had his son, and would tell him how much money they needed the next day. The following night, John called them and demanded $240,000. The FBI had already figured that this was a kidnapping with a ransom, and recommended that Sinatra just pay the ransom and let the FBI track the money to find the criminals. So the boys told Frank Sr. where to deliver the money, right between 2 school buses in Sepulveda, California. And after an FBI agent dropped it off, they went to pick it up. The issue is, though, John and Joe panicked. John called Frank Sr., told him he was going to free Frank Jr., and dropped him off near a freeway. Following that, he hightailed it out of the state. Frank Jr. hid in bushes for a while out of fear of being targeted again, and then was found later in Bel Air after walking a handful of miles and finding a security guard. Immediately after that, he was taken home by the police.
I was scared, I was a little bit nervous naturally, but the only thing I could do is hope for the best.
When was the first time that you talked with Frank? Was it when he was brought home, or did he talk to you on the phone beforehand?
When he was brought home.
When did you first know he was safe? When did you learn?
I never knew that he was safe until I saw him.
Joe ran away to his wife's house, and Barry grabbed the money, cleaned up the hideout, and spent the night at a friend's place. For a while, it worked out. Frank Jr. had safely made it home. Barry finally had his money, splitting it between himself, Joe, and Dean. Barry said, "We laid all the money out, danced on it, lit cigarettes with it, did all the things we'd seen in the movies. We had a money war, throwing wads of bills at each other. But then, things took a turn for the worse."
The FBI locates the San Fernando Valley hideout where the kidnappers of Frank Sinatra Jr. held him for 2 days, and dramatically the case is broken wide open. The FBI conducted its investigation in complete secrecy. 5 days of swift and effective detective work.
Right after the money was retrieved by Barry and Sinatra was freed, the FBI was already closing in on the 3 kidnappers. They were able to follow the evidence to the house that Sinatra was held in, but things really took a turn for the worse because of a certain John Irwin. The tough guy John Irwin fled the state. He was heading to hide out in New Orleans. He decided to stop in San Diego to talk to his brother and decided to confess what he did. Unfortunately for the trio, John's brother ratted him out while he was sleeping. The FBI swiftly moved in, arresting John at his brother's, getting Joe while he was at a friend's, and arresting Barry while he was at his girlfriend's house. They retrieved the money and returned it to Sinatra Sr. It was now time for the trial. The trial began, and Barry created a story that would follow Frank Jr. as a rumor for the rest of his life. And it was the idea that the kidnapping was a publicity stunt that was suggested by mysterious characters involved with the Sinatras. Unfortunately for the defense, the FBI had a lot of strong evidence, including a confession letter that Barry had pre-written. John, Joe, and Barry all got 75 years plus life in prison. However, because they got the maximum sentence, they qualified for insanity defense, which they all got. Their sentences got brought down to 25 years, they all appealed, and they all eventually got out in 3.5 to 4.5 years. When Barry got out, Dean helped him out, and some other friends raised some money for him, so he actually got back into real estate. He became a very successful businessman and became very wealthy over the years. By 1983, his net worth was $17 million. Now and again, Keenan and Jr., men of wealth and prestige who spent a handful of strange days and nights together 35 years ago, will cross paths at Beverly Hills cocktail parties. They do not speak, they simply nod across a crowded room. The actor John Stamos actually knew a guy who was friends with Barry Keenan and did a 10-episode podcast about Barry Keenan's story called The Grand Scheme, Snatching Sinatra. There's about 10 hours of content if you guys are interested in learning more about this story. And there's also a movie called Stealing Sinatra. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and maybe even consider subscribing down below. Other than that, this has been Matty Balls, and I'll see you guys next time.